First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our lives. There's two housekeeping items. First, let you know that the session is being recorded for future use on our YouTube channel. If you don't wish your image to be recorded, please close your video feed. Secondly, I'd remind you of the code of conduct outlined in the Zoom invitation and underscore a couple of points. Please respect our speaker by remaining muted during the talk. We'll unmute you for the Q&A. Be mindful of time limitations and keep your questions and comments as brief as possible so that anybody who wants to speak can participate. Everyone who wishes will be given an opportunity to ask a question before individuals who have already spoken will be recognized, and please respect the confidentiality of personal information. Our speaker today is Blake Desjarlais, who is an MP representing the Edmonton Griesbach territory. He is in Ottawa today, and we're very, very fortunate to have him, but he's going to be squeezed in between his committee assignments and when he has to go back into the House for question period. So he is going to join us at 11:15, and he'll be on from 11:15 to 11:45. So in the meantime, I just want to talk about a couple of things, it being Pride Week, of course. I just want to say that there is a complete list, or the most complete list that I could find, of events coming up in this week in Pride. So I'll just get this link going here. Just one second. I'm going to put it into the chat and highlight a couple of events that are coming up. The first is tonight. I'll just go here. Sorry, I'm trying to think and talk at the same time. So I've put into the chat the link for Capital Pride events, and there's a whole list, a lot of events happening over the next couple of weeks. Just want to highlight a couple of things. Tomorrow, the 3rd, at 4 o'clock downtown on Churchill Square is the kickoff, and it will be for the 40th anniversary celebration, ceremonial Indigenous prayer, introductions from Capital Pride, Evolution Wonder Lounge, the Pride Fest, reading the mayor's proclamation, brief speeches, and so on. So that should be interesting. Fruit Loops and Grindstone Theatre have joined together to form 2 weekends, this coming weekend and the next weekend, of events. They're starting, good timing. So their event starts at 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, and it's down at the Grindstone Theatre on 81st Ave in Strathcona. Then I just want to mention, because we had Kirk from the Edmonton Vocal Minority on as a guest, I just want to really plug that on Saturday at 7:30 at the Southminster Steinhauer United Church, there's going to be an EVM, Edmonton Vocal Minority concert. Always a great concert. I'm looking forward to it. They used to, I don't know if they still do, but I used to really enjoy going because they always used to wind up with a sing-along of Dancing Queen, which was the only time you'll ever get me to sing and dance in public, is for that event. Always an awful lot of fun. And then the only other one that I wanted to highlight is on Sunday the 5th, FAB, which is the Federation of Alberta Bears, is holding their Burst with Pride barbecue in Victoria Park picnic pavilion. And so, please do go to the website and have a look at all of the events that are coming up. Morning, Rob. I think that it's going to be a really exciting month. We've been an opportunity to get out and meet an awful lot of people, person to person. Zoom is really good for remaining connected when you can't get out, but I don't think it's, I always enjoy meeting people in person. It's easier to start a dialogue and get to know people. And I guess that's about all of the filler that I wanted to put in before Blake signs on at 11:15. Jan, do you have any additional comments that you'd like to talk about? Maybe give us a brief introduction to Dancing Queen. Oh, muted. Jan. Okay.
Eric, why don't you put the contact information online for Capital City, and that so other people can look it up.
It's in the chat box right now.
Okay, good.
It should be.
And Blake will be joining us in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
And I think because he's at a federal level, it'd be valuable for folks to think a little bit about some of the things that could be or should be happening at a national level. That would be useful for us as well.
Yeah. Oh, just one other thing I wanted to mention in the upcoming events. There is going to be the Pride bus tour on June 14th, and it is being put on by the Edmonton Downtown Business Association. They don't have that up on their website yet. I'm kind of hoping that they're going to have it up fairly soon. I'm just going to go to, I'll give you a copy. I'll put down the Downtown Business Association web link as well. And I'm hoping that shortly they will have they'll have a link to how to sign up for that bus tour, because the bus tours are always very exciting. And again, as soon as we get a link for that, we will put it on our Facebook page so that hopefully people can join for that. Let me think, what else are we supposed to do for this? Yeah, I think it's really exciting to see that there's a lot of events coming back this year for Pride, and it's always nice to get out and meet people. So please do join in as much as possible. Fortunately, this weekend the weather's supposed to be really nice, so I think I'll be going to Churchill Square tonight and try to participate in as many other activities as I can when we get nice weather like this. Michael, you have any additional thoughts about this coming Pride Month?
I will send, if I get a chance, the information about the bus tour, because I have seen another separate poster on that, and if I can, I'll send that probably to you, Eric, so you can put it up, since I don't know how to do that properly, as you know.
Certainly, and I guess that's what I'll not only, when we do get that link, I'll not only put it up on our Facebook page, but I'll also should be able to send it out by email to everybody who's attended. Again, the Pride bus tour it's really interesting. It's fun, but the other thing is it lets you know that the city of Edmonton and Edmonton Transit and other people are supporting us as a community, and that's quite important to really look at and understand.
Yeah, I think so too. Excuse me.
So we have hopefully 4 minutes until Blake joins us.
Right. So, Erica, I would just add the other thing that the city is doing is they are going to bring out a new bus with a new wrap about Pride, and I think tomorrow that they will also unveil that as well, and it'll be part of the regular bus fleet. kind of thing. That I haven't seen the design exactly what it is under wraps. No one has been able. Let us just say it's been impossible to get any preview of it. And I think that will be part of what they bring out. I think tomorrow or Friday. Yeah, that's tomorrow. But it is specifically for as part of the Pride Week, Pride Month, and part of the city's efforts. So that will be on the streets starting probably Saturday and for the year. It'll be a permanent. It will certainly stay on the bus for at least a year, if not more. And it will be on, and that bus will be on different bus routes over the coming year, kind of thing. That as well. There is one currently that was done, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, and that one is kind of worn out. And and so this is a kind of a replacement. It'll be a little updated as well, I expect. I don't know what it'll be.
And the other thing that Joanne mentioned,
yes,
last week when she was on, was that the route that this bus is going to be taking, I didn't quite understand, but this bus, apparently it's going to cover the most territory of any bus route in the city of Edmonton. They've specifically arranged that so it will get the maximum visibility possible. So looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah. So that's the other one.
Yeah.
That I'm aware of.
Okay. Just checking to make sure that I'm not receiving a desperate text or email from Blake's office. So I'm kind of hoping that they're ready to be logging. There's always an element of tension, it's exciting to see. Yeah. As I mentioned, I think we've mentioned it before, but June 30th is going to be our last session for this spring summer season. We are going to take the summer off. Of course, the core team won't be taking the summer off. We'll be planning our events for the fall over the summertime, but we expect to be back online in September. And important, we're going to, I believe that by September we will be free to be meeting in person. But we also recognize that there have been a lot of people dialing in from other locations across Canada. So we're planning on how we're going to be doing that as a hybrid, both in Zoom and in person. A few technical challenges, but we will figure out how to do that along the way. So again, hopefully we'll be able to meet people in person, have a chat, and anybody who, the advantage of Zoom is that people who are shut-ins or in another location or just can't make it down to our in-person meeting, they can still participate. Of course, if you can make it down to our in-person meeting, then you're going to be welcome to join us for coffee and maybe a snack right after, but and to encourage some fellowship that way.
And Eric, I think you have a new person on your team as well. Do you might want to introduce?
Well, Rob, and unfortunately, Rob has just stepped away for a moment, but we'll talk about him when he comes back. And that's a tentative join. Jan, you have your hand up, but you are muted. Oh, there you are.
I have to compliment you, Eric. You're just doing a really, really good job of filling in this time while we wait for Blake. You're just a natural at it. I just wanted to take a quick question. If Michael has any suggestions for the kinds of things we could ask Blake about if we get the option, do you have any topics that you could recommend we hit on?
I think the notion of what kind of ways that the federal government can support local communities, kind of thing in that, in terms of whether we're talking about the Pride Center or Pride events or a whole range along those kinds of lines, and that to see whether whether he foresees some possibilities with that.
Here he comes. Blake's entering.
Yep. Oh, there he is.
And let's see. Good morning, Blake. So good to see you. Welcome to the Aging with Pride online session. We're so happy to have you here. And so I know your time is really limited. I really appreciate you taking the time. So I will shut up and let you start talking so I don't consume any more of your time. Please go ahead.
Well, I think, first of all, happy Pride Month, friends. It's we did it. I'm sure there was a time, especially since so many of you have been forefront of the leadership and activism in making so much of our diversity and inclusion of reality today. I think it means far more in terms of what you've seen in just your lifetimes of how much it's changed, but how much this month really means to our community. It wasn't that long ago in so many ways that there were overt, extreme, and deadly attacks on our community that harmed young people and their impressions of young people to entering the community or identifying as part of the community. And so it's immensely an honor of mine to be the first two-spirit person in our parliament, leading in the footsteps of so many of you and making what is really our community visible. And so I'm so excited to meet with all of you today. And of course, many of you, I think, is it all of you are from Edmonton or some from the Winnipeg side of things too?
I'll chip in and say I'm from Saskatoon. So,
oh, there's also Saskatoon.
We have Desjarlais.
Yeah, there's lots of Desjarlais, that's for sure. We're everywhere. We're across the entire prairies, and so it's really important that I think we ground ourselves first and foremost with a land acknowledgement. I don't know where everyone's tuning in from, of course, but I'm coming at you folks virtually from the unceded Anishinaabe territories in Ottawa, and of course represent the beautiful territories in Treaty 6, which we all have, well, most of us I'm sure have the honor and pleasure of knowing those lands very well. And so I had the opportunity to actually interact with Aging with Pride in previous. Michael actually reached out to me right before we launched some of the funding expansion for this next year. And I'm not certain if Aging with Pride was one of the recipients, but I certainly hope so for our expansion in the last year, because there was a funny cutoff there for a second. We were really concerned that Aging with Pride might be amongst the 76 orgs that we're going to lose some of the funding, but we had spoken with Michael, of course, and we were able to make sure that through a letter of support that Aging with Pride can continue their services and making sure folks can live with dignity and some of the work that you folks are doing. But Michael, is that right? Did you folks get the extension? Oh, okay, excellent, right on. Okay, well, good. Before I go into too much, I just wanted to make sure I address that right off the top, which is important, because this year I think is a pretty extraordinary year for us. We passed the banning of conversion therapy. That was my very first thing we did. My very first vote ever was to ban conversion therapy. And it's, such a remarkable journey, learning from so many of the survivors of conversion therapy, what it means to them. And it's just what a journey so many of our community members have been on. But one of the really big things and big things they left me with was the memory of those who aren't with us today. And I've always been passionate about finding ways that we can recognize and understand those persons who are part of our community, who fought and given so much, but may not be with us today. I'm sure each and every one of us can think of people in our lives that have passed on, who've contributed to this fight, to this recognition, to this justice. And I think part of our movement going forward, particularly because of Pride Month that's present upon us, isn't just remembering. I want to find ways that we can actually create institutions, grow those institutions, but also have a physical presence in our towns, our streets, and our cities, with buildings. It's so cool that we have in the city of Edmonton, in a huge partnership with Michael and so many other great folks, the tour. We have a queer history tour in Edmonton, and I hope all of you have been able to check it out. It starts at Michael Fair Park, which is cool. And that's the kind of visibility I'm talking about, is making sure we have many, many more parks, many more streets, many more city names, much more recognition of the contributions of the 2S LGBTQI community in Canada. One of the really remarkable projects that's ongoing in Ottawa at the National Capital Commission is actually finding ways to build these stories of survivors and people who are still around today from all walks of life and all aspects of our history into the the National Commission's plans to how they're developing new parks, developing new roadways, and developing aspects around our capital region that highlight some of the contributions of folks who've passed on and those who are still present in the fight for this kind of dignity and recognition. Some of those folks, of course, have given so much to the banning of conversion therapy that some of them are really being profiled this month in relation to that because it's the first year, of course. But what I've heard and what I've found out from survivors is that conversion therapy is still ongoing. There's still some gaps we have to fill in there. Because it's criminalized, it's decreased rapidly the ability for organizations to offer these services in the public in broad daylight. But in some ways, it's created this really insidious underground black market for conversion therapy services. And that has us really concerned. And that's what I spent the last few days talking with survivors of conversion therapy, particularly young survivors who are being subjected to conversion therapy online. And so this is something that the bill never originally contemplated, was the idea that there could be conversion therapy offered in a different country to which someone is participating online in Canada or being forced to participate online in Canada for. And so it's a gap that we're trying to fill. But I just want to acknowledge that although we've made it this far, the battle is going to continue. And every single one of you know that once we make a milestone, we have to think about the next piece of road, the next mile that we have to walk. And it's creating safe spaces in the digital space for young people and for new Canadians, for those who may not otherwise have access, and to make sure that as well as seniors have safe access to internet that also is providing a safe space for seniors who are aging in Pride. And so it's really important that we fill that gap. And then the second really big thing, I think, in terms of our next kind of mile to walk is the funding part still. You know, we have a fill gap. And so we have a stopgap measure where we're putting that funding to groups, the 76 partnered organizations across the country to continue their mandate and to continue to provide services for the 2S LGBTQI community. But the problem is it's only a one extension year. And so I'm really seized with this idea that we need to create a permanent ongoing funding mechanism that should exist forever to make sure that we can't slide back. They can't slide us back in time to a position where our community is not organized, our community is siloed, and the worst case scenario, our community is alone. You know, we have to prevent that from happening in every way, shape, or form, because then we forego the good work that each and every one of you have fought for and done in the contribution to making our society a much better place, a much more inclusive place, and a place where we can actually elect 2S LGBTQI members to parliament, to city councils, to legislatures. And I gave a really awesome talk to some folks yesterday for the launch of Pride Month at the Public Legal Education Center of Alberta. And one of the really important parts that we spoke about with some lawyers who are part of the community who've been doing this for a long time, they mentioned that there's this societal change that is happening, and they can feel it, they can see it. It's happening in the courts, it's happening in institutions, but is it happening fast enough? And this is such a question that left me thinking, you know, is it fast enough? But I also think, of course not. You know, we would like to see this happen overnight. You know, we'd like to see our society become just and great overnight. But the reality is it just doesn't happen that way. It takes contribution from each and every one of us, not just the government, but community members reaching out and finding where homophobia, where transphobia still exists today, and making sure that we find out where those spaces are and we provide those support there in their community. One of the really emerging difficult spaces, I think, where the challenge for our community is entering is support for rural members of our community, particularly seniors who identify as 2S LGBTQI in rural settings. Because what we find, and especially talking to our seniors critic, is that most seniors across the country do not feel supported who identify in our community. And so this is a really sad fact that I think we can fill, and we can find a way to use organizations like Aging with Pride and partner with organizations Aging with Pride, because you have a fantastic model. And to be really frank, it's a dime in a dozen. Aging and pride organizations don't exist everywhere. They don't even exist in some of our major cities. We're looking at some of the prairie provinces, Regina, for example, Yellowknife, and some other centers lack some of the services. And so when we talk to our seniors critic about some of the model that you folks are doing, we often think about how can we expand this? How do we show best practices? How do we make sure that other folks, particularly in small rural settings, can have the same level of support, even if the community there is really isolated or small? And so that's just a big question, I think, that I was hoping to get some of your folks' advice on today and to answer any questions that you also might have. But I'm just so excited to be doing this work. It's pretty big. We weren't able to do lots of this stuff before. It took so long for us to get to the point where our community has held power. And I think we can transition that power now into action, real action, into real voice, so that we can demonstrate to folks who will be entering their senior years that seniors aren't going to be left behind. Seniors aren't going to be forgotten about. In so many aspects of our society, we often see that. But in terms of our queer community and our movement, I think it's an honor to have, in my tradition, we call them elders such as yourselves, who give so much and have such strength that we think it's such a great opportunity for us to continue to rely on your knowledge, but also your experience. Young people don't know the kind of challenges that our community faced 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. They don't know it. It's not in the history books. It's not in, it's not in newspapers. It's not in family stories. It comes from individuals such as yourself offering these stories of resilience and strength to young people, that we can truly understand and better appreciate what this truly means for people moving forward. And I think that's part of the commemoration, but also part of the ability we can try to find ways to create better space for in our public education system, in our healthcare systems, but even in other institutions like our criminal service protection or correctional services folks, because there's often many barriers our community members face, and they often end up in institutions that would otherwise criminalize or have otherwise punished them for how they live their life. And there's still ongoing, for example, discrimination based on those records from things that happened in the 70s, 60s, and 80s that I believe should largely be expunged in terms of crime, our criminal charges related to persons in our community who've participated in activism and have been charged for that activism, but have not been given the relief of expungement for those records, for doing what really is the just thing they were doing at that time. Unfortunately, our criminal code hasn't always been perfect and still isn't perfect. And some people are still suffering from it. But I wanted to make sure that we had some time to hear from each and every one of you as well, so I can learn members of our community, hear your stories as well, and answer any questions or even just comments that you might have, because it's such a great opportunity to do that, especially this month.
Well, first of all, just let me say thank you so much, Blake. There's so much that you said to reflect on, and I'm going to give other people a chance to talk, but I got to get my 2 cents in first. The one is this Zoom. We started Aging with Pride as Zoom as a stopgap, saying, well, we really want people to physically get together, but how can we try to encourage people to make connections until that's possible? And one of the things that we've had people logging in from Montreal, from Winnipeg, Saskatoon, from Mexico,
oh wow,
places. So we are planning on moving to in person whenever we can, but we are going to go for a hybrid, because we also recognize we've had a few people who have mobility challenges. Not the same meeting online as it is meeting in person, but it's still making a connection. And for me, I'm involved in a couple of other projects around seniors, and isolation, we know, is a huge issue. And the second thing is, I think, as you alluded to, as a community, we keep learning. 20 years ago, we didn't know a lot of things. So I'm going to shut up now and ask, I see Roy's got his hand up for a question. So Roy, if you could unmute yourself and let us know.
Thank you. I'm just interested in knowing if, Blake, is there any legislation that we need to ensure is in place not to have what's happening in Texas regarding schools and don't say gay? for an example? Is there something that we in Canada need to fear and something that we need to be aware of and institute before that may happen here?
That's a fantastic question, Roy. It's actually one that some folks from Florida, where that bill was being debated there as well. They reached out to me. A Democratic legislator actually reached out to me and gave me a bit of a context as to what the Don't Say Gay bill looks like in terms of the public the public education system in the United States. And for those who might not be familiar, the United States is currently doing this state-by-state process where typically really far-right states are amending or restricting schools, particularly young age school children who are in grades K to 6, elementary school or primary school. They're limiting their ability to access information related to gender diversity or sexual diversity. And this is a huge red flag for us in Canada. It's something that we often see in terms of American policy creeping over the border into Canada, happens quite often. And it's a huge concern. Luckily, our Supreme Courts are far more powerful than the United States Supreme Court in the sense that governments can't have the kind of direct impact on our court system like the United States does. And so our court system has, since 2010, verified the rights to protection of information, services, and access of individuals who identify as part of our community, and that includes in schools. However, in our province of Alberta, they're finding workarounds to this. In particular, Alberta is probably the most at-risk province for seeing legislation that would directly harm the education for young people and their access to this service. And it's unfortunate that we have to talk about this, these nefarious kind of workarounds that governments are trying to find in order to harm people, because that's really the impact it's having. And so federally, unfortunately, we don't have a strong role in how we regulate education. It's a provincial jurisdictional matter largely, but there are ways we can continue to find ways to define hate under the criminal code, because if a teacher, for example, is employing tactics that are otherwise prohibited by the court, which we've seen in the past in schools, for example, where we see a school teacher harm members of our community for identifying that way or speaking about that in class, they often get penalized and they find themselves withdrawing from the school or withdrawing from access to supports. In that case, we would deem within our jurisdiction federally as a hate crime. And so I think there is things we can do within our criminal code to incentivize people to do the right thing, but not to do harm in the sense that they would prohibit access to their identity and services based on their identity should be defined that way. But in education systems, it's really tough because the provincial governments have complete and whole jurisdiction over how curriculum and the deployment of curriculum is done. And so in Alberta, I know that my provincial colleagues there are really concerned about the moving forward with the new curriculum. In Alberta, there is a curriculum in place right now that overtly ignores gender diversity and overtly ignores sexual diversity. And it's going to rewind the clock on us. If young people don't have access to that information, they're going to adopt the heteronormative, cisgendered reality that in many ways generations far gone from us now adopted. And so it's a really big rolling back of our social progress that I'm really concerned about. And it's going to take the rejection of curriculum, unfortunately, and the rejection of the folks who install that curriculum in order to really get to a point where we can protect our public aged school children from really divisive and I would say homophobic curriculum. But yeah, good question, Roy. Sorry, I don't have a better answer.
No, that's wonderful. I see, Michael, you've got your hand up, and then after you, we'll go to Robert, who's got his hand up. So, Michael, please.
Yes, thanks, and Blake, thanks very much. As usual, you've done a wonderful job and continue to do your good work. Much appreciated. I have one that builds on what you talked about. First of all, the concern with what's happening at the province. I will say, just for just a bright spot, perhaps a small one, and especially since you mentioned it, but on Monday this past week, I led a tour of Queer Downtown to 22 grade 7 kids from the public schools in Edmonton. So they find ways to make to make some of this work.
We just have to make sure Michael volunteers.
Well, and so that a little bit. I do want to though to ask in terms of the funding that is current 1 year. I think that my question is about as you said, the longer term, and particularly for groups like the Pride Center of Edmonton. You know, many cities have a kind of group or groups that are fairly comprehensive, that have been around for quite some time and have always had a difficult time continuing. And it seems to me that I see some priority in that those kind of efforts because of what they can do when they've got the kind of services that they need, and because also they're broad spectrum, and that not to downplay some of the others. And I mean, we're a benefit of some of the money at the moment as well, but we aren't quite the same as something, you know, we're not the same as the Pride Center of Edmonton. So I'm wondering whether there's anything that might be useful to find ways to when you talk about longer term funding, whether there's a way to prioritize a certain sector within the larger queer community that should be getting some of that money, and even whether there might be some opportunity if that were the case, whether you might be able to convince some provinces to do some work with the feds on that. This province, there's an election next year may be different, but it may change it. But another provinces, my guess is that might be a possibility.
No, definitely. Well, Michael, first, I think that is a really bright spot, actually, in terms of how aging with pride and even just making sure that there's monikers around our society and our physical space actually affect young children. You know, and this is also evident in language. You know, when we put Cree language, for example, on stop signs, those young people see it and they say, "Wow, I now know the Cree word for stop." You know, and that's so important, having that visibility, that access, and that tour for young people, even outside the school, is really important. Because if we can't if we can't say gay in our schools, then we're going to say it everywhere else. You know, that's for sure. And I think we have to. And so that's an amazing bright spot. I think that should be highlighted in ways that we can continue to educate our young people and show them their value, show them their love, show them that they're not alone in this. That, you know, thanks for doing that work, Michael. In relation to the funding, this is a big, we should have almost a town hall on this in the future sometime, on ways we can prioritize certain aspects of what the community can deliver in terms of service. Because right now the government really heavily relies on NGOs that are not queer NGOs to deliver oftentimes information, programs, and services that are supposed to service our community, but often don't. And so, you know, that's a really big problem, is that organizations are getting some of that funding that shouldn't be really getting that funding to deliver what would be more comprehensive and more culturally and appropriate services to our community members. And so I think we can look at some existing programs that currently deliver funding, but we can also look at creating a brand new funding stream. And so those are two kind of the two frameworks that I'm working with right now in terms of my consultation with folks on the funding stream, is looking at what services are available currently, what federal services are currently being deployed to particular groups, whether it's seniors, youth, women, or racialized community members, and then finding ways to direct some of that support directly to community members like the Pride Center that do really whole of community approaches that look at all of these aspects that people might be having, all of these multiple identities and intersections of who they are, but would prefer to access a center like the Pride Center for those services like employment insurance, for example, providing assistance with that, providing assistance with OAS and GIS, in which a whole bunch of government related services, if they were housed in safe spaces, I believe that, especially given our Auditor General's report just last week, which says that members of our community, particularly seniors in our Pride community, are finding barriers to accessing services based on location of those services, and also the feeling of unsafety in those settings as well, because they're being misunderstood, particularly if they're transgender. And so I thought, you know, you can really imagine the barriers that could be reduced if you go into a place and you don't have to identify immediately to access that service as a male or female. You don't have to face these barriers in order to access what are government services. And so looking at existing funding models to direct organizations like Pride Center to begin deployment of, but also a new funding model, because Pride Center and other organizations do really unique work as well. They're doing really niche and specifically important work for the community, like, for example, consulting members on, for example, their masculine treatments, like their hormone therapy, counseling, psychotherapeutic information, and mental health services. This is a really unique kind of service that can't just be, you can't just go to a regular psychologist and then understand this stuff and be like, this is what you're going through, Michael, and here's what we're going to help with. That's not going to work. We need to have specific tailored services, particularly to mental health, and the funding to support that. So I think what we need in terms of a comprehensive funding approach for long-term funding is to identify what the groups currently do and demonstrate that they have the capacity to continue to deploy these things on behalf of the government and on behalf of the social services that are currently there. But yeah, great question, Michael. And we should definitely organize that town hall on this.
Absolutely. Robert, you have a question.
Okay, related but different, I guess. So I live in Saskatoon, and our seniors group is associated with the Saskatoon Out Center.
Yes.
And a group very much like this one in some ways. And again, are meeting virtually. So we tend to meet Wednesday mornings, and I think we had 13 of us out yesterday. Affiliated with us, and some overlap, is a group called the Queer Seniors of Saskatchewan that are much more into government lobbying and that kind of thing. Currently doing some research into long-term care, and particularly it's been ongoing for a while, but the fear that seniors from our community have, that if they end up in long-term care or a personal care home, and I realize every province sort of delivers that service differently, that they're going to be going back into the closet because they are, you're really vulnerable when you're in a place like that.
Exactly.
So as I say, Queer Seniors of Saskatchewan has sort of been doing some work on that one. But I guess from your perspective, if I remember rightly, the memorandum of understanding, or letter of agreement, whatever we're going to call it, between the NDP and the Liberals, had, I believe, in there a piece of long-term care standards on a national basis. And I'm wondering what the chances are of having some built into those standards, a guarantee of inclusion and non-discrimination for our community.
Robert, that's awesome. That's a really, really smart and fantastic point you make there, because I think it addresses a really big problem with a really simple solution and tool. And I love that. I love when we can make really big, hard things into something that's really achievable by way of the tools we currently have. There is, in our confidence and supply agreement, portions to identify national long-term home care standards. What we've seen in COVID was just this. It's truly heartbreaking. I don't even know what language to use in terms of how devastating the lack of services and support were for long-term care homes during COVID. I toured in my constituency in Edmonton, a long-term care home run by Revera in the north. It hit the news. It was on the Globe and Mail. It was everywhere, where 60% of those seniors passed away. 60%. Like that's extreme. Like, that is the worst standard in the country. Happened in my poor town in Edmonton in the north side, where 60% of seniors went without really basic needs like food, basic hygienic services, let alone the mental health and psychological supports that they would have needed in order to get through what has been a really terrible time that many people have experienced throughout COVID. And so that was really the impetus for our including that in the deal. But I do think there are really important aspects that you raised that we should also address with the opportunity given to us. Creating national standards, which include a protection and a guarantee for culturally diverse and sexual and gender diverse protections built into the hiring procedures of persons who are working in those facilities, is one really big aspect of that, but also the programming itself. when we did a program review of long-term care home programs, they had about 4 or 5 programs, and 3 out of those 5 programs were identical amongst most in the country. And what I mean is recreational programs, the quality of life programs, every single long-term care home is doing the same thing. And, being queer myself, I'm like, what? I wouldn't want to do any of these things. When I get to that point, why would I want to go to, go do a drive to this museum every day? Why would I want to do these bingos and these really kind of community isolating activities, which I thought they're really isolating our community members. And when I talked to the Northwest Senior Society, for example, they're mentioning that they often are siloed. Their community members are siloed in this, only their age group, for example, has to be forced to participate with one another. They never get to go visit, for example, other community spaces that have multiple age or multiple gender or multiple diversity in them. And so I think part of the national care standard could be, for sure, I agree that we need to find ways to guarantee inclusion, but also the information for training for the members who are working in those places, but also create investments in long-term care homes that look at other recreation to allow persons in our community and the queer community in particular access to recreation that's fulfilling, that is going to make sure that recreation and that support exists for one's own lifestyle. That lifestyle is so important. Our lifestyle is so important because it shapes who we are. These services have to be built around who we are and not the other way around. And that's really some of the big problems that exist in our long-term care homes. But I think we should definitely talk about this one as well. I know one of my colleagues is doing a national tour to do a What We Heard tour. And, if you don't mind, I can add your group to the list so that when they come through, we can maybe do it virtually as well to make sure we include everyone. But of course, they will be making a stop in Saskatoon as well. And so, Robert, maybe I'll definitely give you notice when they stop through there. And so we could try to arrange some of that, because those are 2 big aspects I think about: the training of the people who are working in those facilities, but also the programs offered in those facilities need to be appropriate to our community. Great question, Robert.
Blake, when I spoke to Paige in your office, I promised her that we would let you go by 11:45 at the latest, and I don't want to get in trouble with her. I love having you here. We sign off at 12 promptly, but if you can stay for a few more minutes, I'd love to have you stay. But please, I expect to see somebody coming in and grabbing you by the scruff of the neck and dragging you out. So.
Yeah, I have a little bell here, a little light
Yeah.
when they need me for something, and it's been on for about 4 minutes. But I always know when that light goes on, I have an extra about 10, and because I pushed it so many times. Because we have question period at 2:00 Eastern time here. They always want us to show up for the shenanigans there. But I definitely have some time now. It only takes me 3 minutes to walk over. I have about 5 minutes.
I just want to say quickly, here in Edmonton, we have worked closely with SAGE,
Oh, excellent.
SAGE seniors. They're a very inclusive organization, wonderful. And what we find is that an awful lot of pride centers tend to focus in on the younger population, and the seniors tend to be a little bit forgotten. And a place like SAGE has got the skills, the skill set of the social workers and so on to really focus in on this work. So maybe in your consultation with other cities, that they do try to identify a senior center that has got trained people to respectfully deal with seniors from our community. That was just me. Jan, you had your hand up.
Really, really good work, Blake. Love seeing you here today. I just be curious to know, what's it like to be an MP? Is there any highlights? Like what's the greatest thing in your day that happens? Like, it sounds like such an exciting career. What's it really like?
Oh, Jan, that's a good one. I'd say it's literally like a roller coaster. There's some days that are like really awesome, where you feel like you've done such good work and you feel super satisfied with that work and what you put in that day. But there's other days where you just feel like you've hit so many roadblocks, and there's like bureaucracy and paperwork and just a ton of barriers that really can discourage one from doing this work. But I do think, what keeps me grounded in this is the community members. Like, I always carve out time to talk to community members, because you have like community members have far more barriers in one's life. You know, I'm really occupied in a position of, you know, immense privilege and power, and more so and more voice than most. And so I often I'm, you know, regrounded in reality, which is the fact that we can do good things even without this institution, you know, and just by raising our voice. And so I think my experience in this place has been, especially starting off, was really positive. You know, the banning of conversion therapy, you know, I was really apprehensive at the start because, you know, some folks are still kind of homophobic and transphobic in our institution, and they don't know, they don't want to engage, and they have this kind of standoffishness about them that I'm sure all of you you all know what that feels like, to know when someone doesn't like a member of our community or holds prejudice against our community, but doesn't want to say it. And so I kind of felt this way for the first few weeks. And then when we started ramping up the conversation on conversion therapy and seeing our allies really take a position and calling out their own colleagues, saying, you know what, I won't accept that my colleague votes this way anymore. And, you know, to Aaron O'Toole's credit, he whipped the vote on that one. He said, if there is any of my colleagues who think that people in our caucus, people in our parliament should not be here based on just simply who they love, they should not be in this place. And he whipped the vote that first time. And I was like, what an immense, awesome thing to do. You know, like every political party, no matter what, united at that time and said, we're going to use our power to do what's right. And when Aaron O'Toole did that, you know, I cried, or lots of us did, because it was the big barrier getting the Conservative Party to agree. And he used his power and said, no more can our party engage in this kind of activity. And he came to our 2S LGBTQI caucus and he said these words. And it's a multi-party caucus. Members of the Conservatives also sit on it, and it was immense. And so when we offered, we said, hey, could maybe, you know, it means so much, I think, to us and for the whole country if you were the guy, you know, if your party was the one to present the motion. And it was thought about for a bit, and people didn't really know if it was going to happen. And then just the day afterwards, the Conservative member rose and said, you know, we've consulted every party, and we believe that if the House shall seek it, you'll find unanimous consent for the following motion. And they read it out, and all of us, you know, looked at each other, you know, me, Randy, you know, a whole bunch of other queer members across Parliament. And we said, it's happening. I think it's going to happen today. We got really nervous. It wasn't going to happen. And then it did. And then I was blown away. You know, never, ever in a Westminster Parliament do we see such level of cooperation. And that really inspired me to find ways to work across party lines, to work with my other members, and just work with folks to try to get what's really important to the country done. And so I think that so to me, I think I take a unique approach just because of how we started this work of trying to cross the floor and work with colleagues, and no matter where they come from, because I think our country needs that right now. They need to see that parliamentarians are working together. They need to see that at the end of the day, we're all Canadians and we all want the best for each other, even if we disagree, that we all deserve peace, we all deserve dignity, and we all deserve that integrity. And I think I have some of the best colleagues in the world because of that. You know, I might not agree with all of my colleagues, but I do know that they have a respect for our community, and they know that this is important. And so I think I feel really grateful for the opportunity to serve in this 44th Parliament, because that heavy lifting's been done. You know, the heavy lifting and fighting for our community and for space in this institution has been going on for so long that it finally happened by the time I got here. You know, it was just such an incredible timing to see this finally end this kind of gridlock in our political system. But yeah, great question, Jen. Thanks for asking that. And you're in Mexico. Holy heck, that's cool.
It's Port of Alberta Pride.
Yes.
Yeah. Michael, you've got your hand up. You have a really quick question, because there is going to be
Yes.
a hand grabbing him by the scruff of the
Mine
neck
is
real
just a real
soon, I
short.
think.
Yes, a short suggestion. Because I just got something the other day from a group calling it about gay, lesbian stuff about that called itself a national group. And I'm like, I don't think they're national. You might want to check at times with Blake when a group says they're national, see whether they really are and ask them what they're doing in Edmonton.
Yeah,
We are
exactly.
the fifth largest city in the country.
A capital city of a province.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. I'm starting to get a little bit skeptical that some of these groups are like, yeah, maybe not really national. So just a thought.
Oh,
Thanks.
huge. Funny you bring that up, Michael, because we actually just took off two groups from the National Registry who were claiming to be providing services for national groups under last year's funding. And when the audits came back, of course, we noticed that almost exclusively their funding was funding Vancouver. And of course, as much as we love Vancouver, don't get me wrong, as much as we love Vancouver, you can't be providing services in Edmonton if you're not providing services in Edmonton, New Brunswick, Halifax, even just one other place, one other province. You can't be taken. You don't qualify. And so if you find any organizations like that, send them our way. We usually can't cut them off of the application for funding, but in our review of former funding years, we could tighten it up, because it's not fair for community members who are expecting that service in Edmonton and aren't getting it.
And you could probably just, some of them, when you talk with them, you just say, so nationally, so what have you been doing in Edmonton? Just a little question. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do that.
Okay, it's 11:57. I have to thank you so much, Blake. Really, really appreciate your insight. And just one, I'm moderating, so I get to say this, but what I'm so happy for is that you're preserving that system of collegiality among your fellow MPs. I get very concerned looking at parties becoming radicalized, and just because someone else said it, it can't be a good idea.
Exactly.
I really, really appreciate the fact that you're trying to keep people together, no matter what their political stripe. Can't thank you enough for being here today. I'm gonna say to Paige, it was all his fault.
Yeah, say that, because she's funny.
Yeah, but anyways, thank you so much. Please, everybody, join us next week for Darren Hagan, who is going to do a great Edmonton playwright. You probably know him, Blake.
Oh, yeah.
He is going to do a reading for us next week, and we will send out a brief questionnaire after this to everybody, just to see. We always want to ask, what can we do to improve? And for you, if you could maybe ask Paige to send us a note, let us know if you had any opinions of what we could have done to make this a better situation for yourself.
Oh, I love this. This is great. Any chance I get to meet with community members who are like-minded is a good day for me. To Jan's question, those are good days for me. And I have one request though. Do you mind? I'm a big, I have, I love sharing these things with other folks. Do you mind if I take a picture and I share it with folks? Is that okay for everybody? If you're not okay, you can turn your camera off maybe. But if you are, please stay on. I'd love to.
I'm just doing my hair to make sure that it's good.
Yes, everyone check your hair out real quick.
I got my halo.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, go ahead.
3, 2, 1. Awesome, I got it.
Perfect.
Thanks so much, everyone. Okay, I'm gonna run over to the house.
Question period. Thanks very much.
Okay, see you, friends. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.